The Menendez brothers. On August 20th, 1989, the violent murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez shocked the nation. Two seemingly perfect sons, Eric and Lyle Menendez, became the center of a case that would captivate the public for years. What was initially believed to be a random attack quickly turned into a case filled with dark secrets, lies, and shocking revelations. The question remains: were the Menendez brothers victims of unspeakable abuse, or were they cold-blooded killers seeking a life of luxury? The night of the murders. The night began like any other in the Menendez household. Jose Menendez, a wealthy entertainment executive, and his wife, Kitty, had just returned from a night out. The family's luxurious mansion in Beverly Hills seemed to be a safe haven, a place of wealth and privilege. But on this night, it would become the scene of one of the most brutal double homicides in American history. Jose was found shot multiple times in the head, his body lying in a pool of blood. Kitty's body was discovered in the living room, also shot in the head and upper body. Their deaths were violent and sudden, and at first, it seemed like the work of ruthless intruders. Lyle and Eric, the Menendez brothers, were quick to report the murders. They seemed distraught and confused, but their behavior during the initial investigations would raise more questions than answers. The brothers' reactions. Eric and Lyle Menendez immediately appeared on television and in interviews, presenting themselves as devastated sons mourning the loss of their parents. Both brothers cried and expressed disbelief, painting a picture of a family torn apart by tragedy. Their emotional displays seemed genuine to the public, and for a time, they were treated as victims in a crime that had shattered their world. But as investigators began to delve deeper into the case, their stories started to unravel. Lyle and Eric's accounts of the night they discovered the murders were inconsistent. They claimed to have been out at the movies during the time of the murders, but when law enforcement pieced together the timeline, there were glaring holes in their statements. It wasn't long before the brothers' behavior started to draw suspicion. Despite their claims of grief, they seemed unusually calm and even spent large sums of money in the weeks following their parents' deaths. Lyle, in particular, purchased a Rolex watch and took a lavish vacation with his girlfriend. His actions seemed out of place for someone mourning the violent loss of their parents. A dark family history. As investigators dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge about the Menendez family. Jose Menendez, a successful businessman, had a reputation for being controlling and manipulative. But the real shock came when Eric and Lyle began to reveal the true extent of the abuse they had allegedly suffered at the hands of their father. Both brothers accused Jose of physically, emotionally, and sexually abusing them for years. Eric and Lyle claimed that the abuse began when they were young children and continued into their teenage years. Their mother, Kitty, was accused of turning a blind eye to the abuse, often enabling Jose's actions. The abuse, they claimed, became a constant source of fear and torment. The brothers described how Jose would frequently lash out in anger, punishing them for minor infractions. They recounted incidents where their father would sexually assault them, a trauma that haunted them for years. For years, Eric and Lyle felt trapped in their own home, unable to escape the terror that their father had instilled in them. Their mother, Kitty, they claimed, was either too afraid to intervene or complicit in the abuse. As time went on, the brothers became increasingly desperate, feeling as though there was no way out. The confession. In the months following the murders, the brothers began to display increasingly erratic behavior. They were no longer the grieving sons they had initially appeared to be. Instead, their actions suggested something more sinister was at play. It was during this period that Eric finally made a shocking confession. In a private conversation with a therapist, Eric revealed the horrifying truth about the murders. He confessed that he and Lyle had killed their parents, but he didn't frame the act as premeditated murder. Instead, Eric claimed that the murders were a result of years of abuse and pent-up anger. According to Eric, the brothers had been planning the murders for months, but the actual killings were not part of a well-thought-out plot. They claimed that the moment they shot their parents was a result of a breaking point, a culmination of years of suffering at the hands of their father. The brothers reportedly hoped that by killing Jose, they would finally be free of the abuse. The details of their confession were chilling, and the brothers' story of self-defense against years of trauma seemed to be a central element in the case. The trial. When the case went to trial, it became one of the most high-profile and controversial cases of the 1990 seconds. The public was captivated by the idea that two young men, seemingly perfect and well-educated, could commit such a horrific crime against their own parents. But the defense team began to argue that the brothers were not killers, they were victims. The defense's strategy hinged on the claim that Eric and Lyle had been subjected to years of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse at the hands of their father. They argued that the brothers had snapped after years of torment, and the murders were a result of extreme emotional distress. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a very different picture. They argued that the brothers had planned the murders in advance, motivated by greed and a desire for their parents' wealth. They pointed to the brothers' behavior after the murders, including their lavish spending and apparent lack of remorse, as evidence that the killings were not a crime of self-defense, but cold-blooded murder. The trial lasted for several months, and both sides presented compelling arguments. The jury deliberated for weeks, but ultimately, they convicted Eric and Lyle Menendez of first-degree murder. However, the jury was unable to agree on the possibility of the death penalty, and both brothers were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath. In the years since their conviction, the Menendez brothers have remained in prison, despite their efforts to appeal their sentences. The brothers continue to serve their life sentences. Over the years, they have become symbols of both tragedy and controversy. The case remains one of the most debated in criminal history. Was it truly a case of self-defense? Or were Eric and Lyle simply victims of their own choices? How much responsibility should be placed on the trauma they experienced? And how much is attributable to their desire for money and freedom? The Menendez brothers' case continues to raise complex questions about justice, family dynamics, and the line between self-defense and murder. A lasting legacy. The story of Eric and Lyle Menendez is one that still fascinates the public. Their case has been the subject of countless documentaries, books, and TV shows. But the central question remains, did they deserve life in prison? Or were they simply victims of their father's cruelty? While Eric and Lyle Menendez may never escape the shadow of their parents' deaths, their story will continue to provoke debate for generations to come. Were they truly seeking justice? Or were they simply murderers using their troubled past as an excuse? The Menendez brothers' tragic story is a complex web of violence, trauma, and family dysfunction. The line between victim and perpetrator is often blurred in cases like this, where years of abuse can drive individuals to commit unimaginable acts. But ultimately, the question remains, did Eric and Lyle Menendez deserve their sentences? Or were they simply two brothers trapped in a nightmare of their father's making? What do you think? Were the Menendez brothers justified in their actions? Or were they driven by greed and a desire to escape their parents' control? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in more dark files, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories from around the world.